See that sprawling $12 million resort behind me? The one gleaming with marble fountains and valet parking under twinkling lights? Yeah, that's sitting right on top of my grandfather's land. The same 127 acres my family owned for nearly 70 years before a certain HOA queen decided she wanted it for herself. That land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was legacy, sweat, and 70 years of Morrison blood. But one day, Patricia Whitmore showed up wearing pearls, perfume, and a predator's smile, claiming I owed her $450,000 in community violations. Said my roosters were too loud. Said my barn was unsightly. Said I had 30 days to pay up or she'd take it all. She thought I was just some country fool who'd bow and break. She was dead wrong. Now that woman's serving time in federal prison. And I'm about to tell you exactly how we got there. But before the war, there was peace. My grandfather, Earl Morrison, bought this farm back in 1952 with a handshake and a promise to pay it off in milk money. No lawyers, no contracts, just old-school trust. Over the decades, he built it into one of the finest dairy farms in East Tennessee. 3 barns, a creek winding through green pastures, and 40 head of cattle that made the mornings sing with life. Earl wasn't a rich man, but he was a proud one. He'd always say, a man's worth isn't in what he owns, but in what he builds for the next generation. And for him, that meant this land. When Earl passed away in 2019, he left me everything, the farm, the legacy, and about $89,000 in medical debt. My name's Jake Morrison. I've been a construction worker since I was 18. I didn't know much about running a dairy operation, but I knew I wasn't about to let the bank take what my grandfather built with his bare hands. For a while, it was quiet. Peaceful even. Then came 2020, and with it, a development called Willowbrook Estates. Overnight, my world changed. The tobacco fields that used to border my land were bulldozed into fancy cul-de-sacs and luxury McMansions. Houses worth nearly $1 million each, all perched just high enough to look down on my weathered barn like it was some kind of historical embarrassment. And with those houses came something far worse than construction noise, an HOA. They formed one, before the first family even unpacked a box. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too busy paying off my grandfather's debts and keeping the cattle, fed to care about a bunch of city folks playing neighborhood politics. Then came Patricia Whitmore. It was early morning, about 7. The mist was still rising off the creek as I scattered feed for the chickens. Then I heard it, the crunch of expensive tires on my gravel driveway. Out stepped this polished woman in a cream-colored pantsuit, heels stabbing the mud like she owned the earth beneath her. She looked like she'd never even seen a rooster in person. "Good morning," she said with a syrupy southern drawl that could have sweetened iced tea. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I believe we need to discuss your problem." She wasn't there to discuss anything. She was there to dictate. Clipboard in hand, she started listing violations like she was reading my obituary. Excessive noise before 8 a.m., pointing at my rooster like he was a felon. Unsightly agricultural structures visible from the main road. She wrinkled her nose at the smell of manure. Odors affecting community property values. I just stood there gripping a fence post so tight I could feel splinters biting my palm. That barn she called an eyesore? My grandfather built it himself, every board, every nail. It had stood longer than her manicured lawns had existed, but Patricia didn't care. She flipped a page and said, a $500 monthly mitigation fee should cover the inconvenience. $500 every month. For the crime of being a farmer on family land. When I asked what would happen if I refused, she smiled. That perfect lawyer's smile that hides a dagger behind lipstick. "Then," she said, "we'll explore other legal remedies. I'm sure you'd prefer to handle this reasonably, rather than expensively." As she strutted back to her shiny BMW, my German Shepherd Rex started barking, loud and proud, like he could sense the evil walking away. Patricia flinched, shot me a glare cold enough to freeze sunlight, and drove off. That's when I knew this wasn't about noise complaints or property values. This was about power. And Patricia Whitmore had just declared war on the wrong man. 2 weeks later, the first strike landed. A certified letter arrived from the Environmental Protection Agency, a complaint filed by concerned citizens about possible groundwater contamination from my cattle operation. The document was packed with technical jargon no ordinary neighbor would know: nitrogen runoff coefficients, bacterial load thresholds, words that only someone with legal training or environmental consultants would understand. It was a setup. An inspector came by in a government sedan. Nice guy. Looked more like a school teacher than an investigator. Took water, soil, and air samples, apologizing the whole time. Probably nothing, he said. But someone filed a very detailed report. 3 weeks later, I got the results. My farm? Cleaner than a preacher's conscience. The water, soil, and air all tested perfectly fine. But that didn't matter. I still owed $3,200 for the inspection. And just when I thought it was over, the local paper ran a front-page story: farm practices under investigation. No mention of being cleared. No mention of false complaints. Just that headline, the kind that poisons a man's reputation. Without saying anything outright, that's when I stopped reacting and started investigating. Went down to the county clerk's office, the kind that smells like burnt coffee and 30 years of dust, and started pulling public records, HOA formation papers, permits, legal filings, all public, all accessible for the cost of a few photocopies. And that's when I found it: the smoking gun. Every single legal document for Willowbrook Estates had been handled by Whitmore and Associates, Patricia's own law firm. The same woman who now stood as HOA president was the one who had drafted every rule, every covenant, every clause she was now using to strangle me financially. She had built the trap, and I'd walked right into it. But she didn't know yet that the farm boy she underestimated was about to fight back, and that this old land had one more battle left in it. The morning after I found Patricia's name stamped on every HOA document, something in me shifted. Up until that moment, I'd been reacting, trying to survive her attacks one letter, one fine, one insult at a time. But now I knew what she really was: not just a neighbor with too much time and too little empathy. She was an architect of manipulation, a predator who built the maze before sending in the mouse. So I decided to start fighting back. The next HOA meeting was my battleground. The Willowbrook Community Center was nothing more than a renovated one-room schoolhouse that now looked like a wedding venue. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and rows of folding chairs that looked out of place in all that shine. I walked in wearing my cleanest flannel and work boots, earning sideways glances from people who'd rather pretend I didn't exist. Patricia was already at the front, running the meeting like she was CEO of a corporation instead of president of a neighborhood club. Her voice was syrupy smooth as she reviewed financial reports and talked about community harmony. When she spotted me, that same smile flickered across her face, the one that pretended warmth but hid a knife behind every word. She opened her mouth to speak, but I beat her to it. I held up a folder thick with paperwork from the county clerk's office and said in a calm, even tone, "I've been doing some reading. Turns out Whitmore and Associates, the same firm that handled every legal document for Willowbrook Estates, is owned by you, Patricia. You wrote the HOA rules. You're the one enforcing them. So tell me, how's that not a conflict of interest?" You could have heard a pin drop. The room went still, and even the air conditioner seemed to hold its breath. Patricia's fake smile cracked for the first time. Her voice trembled just slightly when she said, "I'm not sure what you're implying," but her eyes gave her away. Whispers rippled through the crowd, neighbors exchanging looks, wondering if they'd also been victims of her fees and community standards. Patricia slammed her gavel, declared the meeting adjourned, and swept out of the room like a storm trying to hold itself together. That night, I sat at my kitchen table under the hum of a single bulb, flipping through Earl's old records again. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was curious. Because Patricia's face, that flicker of fear when I mentioned the county, told me something big was hiding underneath all this HOA nonsense. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. 3 surprise health inspections in 14 days. Noise complaints filed by different neighbors every other day. Even anonymous calls to the county claiming I was running an illegal slaughterhouse, but each time the inspectors found nothing. My barns were spotless, my cattle healthy, my fences solid. I could tell Patricia was getting desperate. She was trying to bury me in paperwork, death by 1,000 fines. And that's when I remembered something Earl used to say. When you don't know where the snake's hiding, start by stirring the grass. So, I stirred. One Saturday afternoon, I went up to the attic of the farmhouse. That place hadn't been touched since Earl died. It was packed with decades of dust, yellowed papers, and the kind of memories that feel like ghosts watching from the shadows. Boxes stacked to the rafters, old ledgers, tractor manuals, even a shoebox full of ration coupons from the 1950s. And that's when I found it, the old survey map, hand-drawn in pencil, signed by the county surveyor back in 1952. I spread it out on the floor, tracing the faded lines with my finger. My heart started racing. The boundary line on that map didn't match the one on the modern plats filed by the HOA's developers. According to Earl's map, our property extended an extra 40 feet beyond where the current fence stood. 40 feet doesn't sound like much until you realize what's sitting on it. That strip of land now held the Willowbrook Community Playground, the same playground Patricia bragged about during HOA meetings, the one they'd built with $15,000 worth of premium swing sets and that ridiculous rubber mulch that cost more per square foot than my kitchen flooring. In other words, part of their beloved community property was sitting on my land. I spent the next few hours verifying it. I compared the hand-drawn survey to the county's digital plat maps, double-checked the coordinates, and even found the original marker stones still embedded in the roots of an old oak tree. No doubt about it, the HOA had built on the wrong side of the fence, and suddenly the entire game changed. That night, I scanned the old map and posted a simple side-by-side comparison to the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group. No anger, no accusation. Just a caption that read, "Interesting discovery about property lines. Might want to double-check those HOA boundaries." Within 2 hours, my phone was blowing up. Comments, messages, shares. Some neighbors were shocked, others defensive, a few even supportive. And right in the middle of it all, Patricia Whitmore. Her response came fast and loud, written in all caps like a declaration of panic. "This is harassment and defamation. Legal action will be taken. Nothing screams guilt like threatening a lawsuit over a map." 2 days later, I pulled into my driveway and found a sheriff's cruiser waiting. The deputy stepped out, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "I've got a restraining order here. Ms. Whitmore claims you've been threatening her and her board members." I stared at the paperwork, disbelief turning into a bitter laugh. Patricia had taken my Facebook post, proof of her mistake, and twisted it into a threat. According to her filing, I was intimidating the HOA and inciting hostility against community leadership. The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Patricia arrived looking like she'd stepped straight out of a courtroom. Drama, navy suit, 2 assistants, and enough perfume to fumigate the building. I showed up in my cleanest work clothes, carrying nothing but a folder full of evidence. She went first, spinning her story with practiced precision. How I was a danger to the neighborhood. How I'd been harassing families. How my uncontrolled animals and erratic behavior posed a safety risk. The judge listened, arms crossed, eyes heavy with boredom. When it was my turn, I laid out the truth. I explained the history, the fake EPA complaint, the property line issue, the Facebook post. I tried to show the survey, but the judge cut me off. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "I'm issuing a temporary restraining order. No contact with HOA board members. No social media posts about them. Violation will result in arrest." I walked out of that courtroom with a piece of paper that turned me into the villain in my own story. And as I passed Patricia in the hallway, she leaned close enough that her perfume burned in my nose. "You should have taken the easy way," she whispered. "Now it's going to cost you everything." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about property lines anymore. This was about power, greed, and something buried much deeper beneath my grandfather's land, and I was about to find out just how far Patricia Whitmore would go to get it. That restraining order was Patricia's victory lap, a shiny legal muzzle meant to humiliate me, to box me in while she played queen of the cul-de-sac. But what she didn't know was that every move she made was pushing me closer to the truth, the real reason she wanted my land so badly. It started with the for sale notices. Within a week of that court hearing, glossy flyers started appearing on my gate. Urgent offer for development potential. Prime real estate investment opportunity. It was like someone was taunting me. And then came the big one. A thick envelope from the county courthouse titled Motion for Forced Sale of Property for Public Nuisance. Public nuisance. That's what Patricia had turned my grandfather's farm into, at least on paper. The filing was hundreds of pages of legal mumbo-jumbo, but the summary was simple. My farm was allegedly such a blight on the community that the only solution was to sell it at auction. 30 days, they said. 30 days and 70 years of Morrison history would be gone. I hired the only lawyer I could afford, Jimmy Fitzgerald, the same man who'd helped settle my grandfather's estate. Jimmy was honest, hard-working, and hopelessly outnumbered. Watching him go up against Patricia's legal team was like watching a small-town sheriff stand off against an invading army. "Jake," he told me one night over stale diner coffee, "they've got a judge in their pocket, a law firm out of Nashville, and more money than we can count. They're not playing fair. They're playing for keeps." That's when desperation sent me digging again. Literally. I went back up into Earl's attic. There were boxes I'd never opened, labeled in my grandfather's careful handwriting. One said, "Important papers." Inside, buried under decades of dust and forgotten receipts, I found letters that froze me cold. They were dated 1995. Correspondence from the Tennessee Natural Gas Exploration Company. The letters were formal, typed on heavy stationery offering to lease the mineral rights beneath our farm. They claimed new drilling technology had revealed significant shale gas reserves beneath our land. The offer, $50,000 up front plus royalties for anything extracted. Earl's handwritten reply was simple, in neat cursive that still smelled faintly of ink and tobacco. "Thank you for your interest. But this land is for growing things, not digging them up." He'd turned them down flat. I remember just sitting there at the kitchen table, the old letters spread out in front of me, realizing what my grandfather had unknowingly protected all these years. If those reserves had been valuable in 1995, what would they be worth now, 30 years later? The more I researched, the more the numbers made my head spin. Natural gas prices had tripled. Drilling technology had evolved. Modern horizontal fracking could reach deposits that were impossible to touch back then. My 127 acres weren't just valuable. They were sitting on a fortune millions, maybe tens of millions, and now it all made sense. Patricia didn't want my farm because of roosters or barns. She wanted what was underneath it. I started making phone calls, quiet ones. Tennessee Energy Partners called me back within 24 hours. Then Appalachian Gas and Oil. Then 2 more companies from out of state. Every single one wanted to send a geologist to survey potential extraction opportunities. Translation: they wanted a piece of the pie Patricia had been scheming to steal, and somehow she found out. The next morning, just after sunrise, a white BMW X5 came crunching up the gravel drive. Same car, same woman. But this time, Patricia didn't look polished or perfect. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes sunken. She looked like someone who'd been awake for days. She stormed right into my kitchen without knocking. The fake Southern charm was gone. "We need to talk," she said, voice sharp as barbed wire. "I know you've been talking to gas companies." "That's a mistake, a big one. I didn't answer." I just stared at her, waiting. She kept talking. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. This isn't just me anymore. There are people involved, investors, powerful ones. They've put a lot of money into this development, and you're standing in the way of progress." Progress. That word again. The same one she'd used when she tried to fine me for having chickens. Then she said it. "You can take our offer and walk away with enough to start over somewhere else. Or you can lose everything." And just like that, she was gone. Back into her expensive car and out of my driveway like a storm retreating behind thunder. But her words kept echoing. people involved, investors, progress. Who were these people? What were they really building next door? That night, I called Marcus Thompson, an old Army buddy who now ran a private investigation firm in Nashville. Marcus was the kind of guy who could find out what brand of toothpaste you used in high school if he wanted to. Within 48 hours, he showed up at my place in a dented Ford pickup, the kind of vehicle nobody pays attention to, which was exactly how Marcus liked it. He shook my hand, looked around the farm, and said, "Jake, you always did have a knack for finding trouble." By Monday morning, he had the first batch of results, and they were bad. Patricia Whitmore wasn't just a controlling HOA president or a crooked attorney. She was drowning in debt. Gambling debts, to be exact. Atlantic City, Las Vegas, even a riverboat casino down in Mississippi. Her credit cards were maxed, her Nashville home was mortgaged twice, and she'd borrowed money from sources Marcus described as the kind of people you don't want to owe favors to. And then came the bombshell. Marcus found corporate filings connecting Patricia directly to the development company behind Willowbrook Estates, not just as their attorney, as a part owner. She personally held 15% of the company that built those McMansions and formed the HOA. She wasn't just enforcing the HOA's rules, she wrote them, owned them, and was using them to strangle landowners into selling, and it didn't stop there. Marcus found a geological survey from 2018, one commissioned by a shell company called Tennessee Resource Development, LLC. The survey covered 12 square miles, including my property, and estimated the recoverable natural gas reserves between $8 and $12 million. The LLC, as it turned out, was tied to Patricia's firm. "She's not stealing land for an HOA expansion," Marcus said, laying out the documents across my kitchen table. "She's stealing access to a gas field. And your farm? It's the access point. Without it, they can't drill a single well." It all clicked. The fake EPA complaint, the harassment, the fines, the restraining order. Every move Patricia had made wasn't random. It was strategy. A legal and psychological siege meant to make me sell. I sat there for a long time that night, staring at the creek outside my window, listening to the cattle settling in for the night. Earl had always said, "If you take care of the land will take care of you." Maybe this was how it was finally paying us back, with buried treasure. Patricia Whitmore thought she was winning. She thought she'd backed me into a corner, but she didn't know that the same land she was trying to steal was about to turn the tables on her. Because now I wasn't fighting to save a farm. I was fighting to expose $1 million con, and this time I wasn't fighting alone. Marcus's investigation didn't just open a door, it blew the whole wall down. For the first time, I wasn't guessing. I wasn't reacting. I knew exactly who Patricia Whitmore was, what she'd been doing, and why my family's land had become her obsession. But now came the hard part, turning that truth into action before she buried me under another mountain of paperwork and lies. That night, the old farmhouse felt alive again, not with fear this time, but with focus. My kitchen table looked like a war map. Legal documents, geological surveys, financial statements, all spread out beneath a flickering lamp. Earl's worn leather briefcase sat beside me like a silent witness to the fight ahead. The next morning, Marcus showed up early with coffee and bad news. "She's already making moves," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of new filings at the county office. Patricia and her development company had fast-tracked an economic development proposal for my land. They were calling it the Tennessee Gateway Energy Center. Her plan was simple. If she couldn't scare me into selling, she'd convince the county to seize my property through eminent domain for public benefit. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw something. Patricia had gone from HOA harassment to full-blown corporate theft, all dressed up as community progress. That's when we decided to fight back, not with fists, but with precision. I called in everyone I trusted. Marcus, obviously. Then Jimmy Fitzgerald, my old lawyer, the one who'd been hanging on by sheer grit. And one more person, my cousin, Tommy Morrison, an investigative reporter with Channel 5 in Nashville. That night, my kitchen turned into a command center straight out of a movie. Marcus had surveillance photos and corporate filings spread out like a spider web. Jimmy had a pile of legal motions, each labeled with sticky notes and statute numbers. And Tommy sat there with his recorder, jotting down every detail with the kind of grin reporters get when they smell a career-making story. "All right," I said, pointing to the table. "We know her plan. Now let's build ours." We divided the counterattack into 3 parts: legal, financial, and public. Part 1. The legal offensive. Jimmy filed motions faster than Patricia could create lies. A challenge to the HOA's jurisdiction over pre-existing farmland. A petition to dismiss every violation based on selective enforcement. But the real bombshell was his ethics complaint, a formal submission to the Tennessee Bar Association, accusing Patricia of professional misconduct, representing both the HOA and a private development company while profiting personally. Jimmy explained, flipping through the complaint. "That's textbook conflict of interest. If they verify this, she could lose her law license before she even gets to court." Part 2. The financial trail. Marcus traced Patricia's empire like a bloodhound. He followed her shell companies through 3 states, connecting them to a Houston-based firm called Apex Energy Solutions, a corporation notorious for buying mineral rights through local partners. "She's just middle management," Marcus said, pointing at the chart he'd drawn. "The real money's coming from Apex. They bankroll the developments, she secures the land, and everyone cashes out when the drilling starts. It's corporate colonization, one neighborhood at a time. And the best part? All of it was documented through public records. Corporate filings, property transfers, even her casino debts linked to HOA accounts she'd skimmed. Marcus had her dead to rights. Part 3. The public exposure. That's where Tommy came in. HOA corruption was already trending online. People everywhere were sick of petty dictators, weaponizing community rules. But this was next level. Corporate fraud hiding behind an HOA, Tommy said, scrolling through headlines on his laptop. "That's not just a story, that's a scandal. We hit them with the truth and let public outrage do the rest. But before any of that went live, we needed the one thing Patricia couldn't fight, community support. And for that, we had a secret weapon, Mary Beth Chen. Mary Beth had lived in Willowbrook Estates long before the HOA existed. A retired school principal, sharp as a tack and twice as fearless. Over coffee and homemade biscuits, she revealed that Patricia's bullying had reached nearly every household in the neighborhood. "The Hendersons got fined for planting tomatoes," she said, shaking her head. "Bob Mitchell had to remove his solar panels because they were reflecting too much light. And poor Mrs. Thompson, Patricia, made her tear down her late husband's workshop for being structurally unappealing. That woman's been terrorizing us for years. With Mary Beth's help, the quiet grumbling turned into organized resistance. She started gathering affidavits, screenshots of HOA overreach, and stories from residents too scared to speak before. The more we uncovered, the more the neighborhood turned against its self-appointed queen. Meanwhile, I was working on my own ace, the mineral rights. Tennessee Energy Partners had offered a legitimate drilling deal. Environmentally responsible extraction using horizontal wells that would barely disturb the surface. The contract was worth $12 million over 10 years, with an upfront payment of $1.2 million upon signing. That single document made Patricia's entire scheme worthless. "Once this lease goes public," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "she's done. You'll not only keep your land, you'll own the rights to everything she tried to steal. We didn't just have proof. We had power." But the most satisfying part was watching Patricia dig her own grave. The more pressure she felt, the sloppier she became. She started showing up at business meetings she wasn't invited to, pushing her development proposal like it was gospel. The county commission, the Rotary Club, even local church luncheons, she was everywhere. Pitching her energy center as a savior for jobs and tax revenue. But behind her polished speeches, the cracks were widening. Then came the break-in. One Thursday evening, I came home from a long day on site to find my front door ajar. My heart sank. Inside, drawers were pulled open, papers scattered across the floor. But nothing valuable was gone. My laptop sat untouched. My wallet was still on the counter. Even Earl's antique rifle was right where it always hung. The only things missing were my documents, the property surveys, the mineral rights letters, and every piece of evidence that proved my claim. They hadn't robbed me. They'd come to erase me. I called the sheriff's office, but the deputy who arrived looked bored before he even stepped out of his cruiser. "Probably just kids or junkies looking for something quick to sell," he said, scribbling notes on his pad. Right. Junkies who knew exactly which file cabinet held the mineral rights documents, but Patricia had miscalculated again. A week earlier, Marcus had installed small security cameras around the property. The footage showed everything, including a white BMW X5 parked halfway down the road, its lights off, engine idling, during the exact time of the break-in. The same BMW that had been in my driveway the day Patricia delivered her threats. Her mask was slipping fast. And once that footage hit Tommy's newsroom, there'd be no putting it back on. The battle lines were drawn now. Patricia thought she could crush me through intimidation, but every move she made was turning into evidence against her. And when someone like her, proud, polished, and power-drunk, starts to panic, they make mistakes. Big ones, the kind that get people arrested. By the time Patricia's goons broke into my house, the war had gone from legal to personal. She wasn't just trying to take my land anymore. She wanted to destroy me. My reputation, my peace, my name. But what she didn't realize was that her desperation was leaving a trail of evidence a mile wide, and every desperate act was another nail in her own coffin. After the break-in, Marcus and I went through every second of footage from the cameras he'd installed. The front porch cam caught a glimpse of the white BMW idling down the road. The side camera caught two silhouettes slipping through the gate. And though the camera by the back door had mysteriously malfunctioned that night, it was enough to tell a story. A story that put Patricia's fingerprints all over a federal crime. Breaking and entering to interfere with a legal proceeding wasn't just harassment. It was obstruction of justice. We turned the footage over to Jimmy, who filed it as part of our ongoing civil defense. But while we were playing it smart, Patricia went fully unhinged. Within days, glossy flyers began appearing around town, stuck to windshields, taped to cafe windows, even tucked into church bulletins. Each one featured a photo of me, printed in grayscale with headlines like "Unstable," "Farmer Threatens Neighborhood," and "Community Development Delayed by Violent." "Landowner." The paragraphs beneath were careful, worded just enough to poison reputations without crossing into outright lies. Concerns about mental instability, history of conflict, possible weapons on property. It was textbook smear strategy. And anyone who didn't know the truth might have believed it, but Patricia made one big mistake. She printed them on the same high-quality paper her law firm used for official correspondence. Same font, same watermark, same legal disclaimers at the bottom. When Mary Beth got her hands on one, she stormed into my kitchen, waving it like a flag. "Honey, this witch just handed you her confession on company stationery." And she was right. Patricia had crossed from manipulation into madness. But the real punch came the following Monday morning. At 6:00 a.m., Jimmy called, his voice tight and urgent. "Jake, they just filed an emergency motion. They're calling you a public safety risk. They want to seize the property immediately." I sat there in silence for a moment, trying to process it. "Public safety risk?" "Yeah," Jimmy said. "She's claiming you're armed, unstable, and making threats. There's even a psychiatric report attached, supposedly from a licensed doctor who says you're showing signs of paranoia." A psychiatric report. From a doctor I'd never even met. Patricia had officially gone nuclear. The hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. Marcus spent the next few hours racing to pull every bit of ammunition we had. Financial records, surveillance footage, the flyers, the casino debts, and a list of her shell companies. He wasn't just going to defend me. He was going to expose her. By the time we got to the courthouse, it felt like the whole county had shown up. Patricia strutted in wearing a navy blue power suit, flanked by two assistants and a man she introduced as Dr. Henderson, her so-called psychiatrist. Her face was calm, her tone polished, but the tremor in her hand as she shuffled papers gave her away. The judge, not the same one who'd issued the restraining order, called the court to order. Patricia opened with the performance of her life. She painted me as an unhinged farmer, a danger to the neighborhood, a man spiraling into delusion. She even played victim, claiming she feared for her safety. When it was Jimmy's turn, he stood up slowly, calm and composed. "Your Honor," he said, "we're not here to debate personalities. We're here to expose fraud." Then he called Marcus to the stand, and that's when everything unraveled. Marcus laid out Patricia's entire empire, the gambling debts, the falsified documents, the shell companies. He produced bank statements showing HOA funds transferred into her personal casino accounts. He showed photographs of her at slot machines just days after, official HOA business trips. He even had recordings of phone calls where Patricia referred to me as the last obstacle and discussed dealing with the Morrison problem. The courtroom went silent. Then Tommy's crew arrived, a full Channel 5 news team with cameras rolling. They'd filed the proper paperwork to record the hearing since it was a public proceeding. And when the red light on that camera flicked on, Patricia's face drained of color. For 3 hours, Marcus walked the court through every lie she'd told, every scam she'd orchestrated, every document she'd forged. By the time he was done, the judge looked like he'd aged 10 years. When Jimmy stood again, his voice was steady. "Your Honor," he said, "my client isn't mentally unstable. He's a man fighting to protect his family's legacy from a woman who's committed fraud, perjury, and theft. And I have one final exhibit, Ms. Whitmore's arrest record from the time she was caught using HOA funds to pay personal debts, currently under review by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation." The judge leaned back, sighing heavily. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "this court does not take kindly to being used as a weapon in a fraudulent scheme. The emergency motion is denied, and this matter is being referred to state authorities for criminal investigation." And just like that, Patricia's empire cracked, but she wasn't done digging her own grave. As we stepped out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Patricia tried to shove past them, but one of Tommy's mics caught her hissed words that would air on the evening news. "You have no idea what you've done," she snarled. "You're going to lose everything." Tommy raised his phone, recording. "Is that a threat, Ms. Whitmore?" Her face froze as she realized what she'd just done. Issued a threat on camera, in public, minutes after being exposed for fraud. The clip went viral before sundown. That night, Channel 5 led with the headline, "HOA President Accused of Multi-Million-Dollar Land Fraud Scheme." The segment was brutal. Tommy narrated the entire story. The harassment, the false reports, the break-in, the natural gas discovery. Footage of Patricia leaving court played beside graphics connecting her to Apex Energy Solutions. They even showed the casino footage Marcus had found, slot machines blinking behind her while HOA funds drained away. And then, that moment, the viral clip. Patricia's face twisted in fury, eyes wild, spitting those last venomous words. "You're going to lose everything." It was the perfect picture of power undone. That night, I sat on Earl's old porch swing listening to the crickets, the creek, and the silence that finally felt like peace. For months I'd been fighting to survive. Now, it felt like I might actually win. But the war wasn't over yet. Tomorrow morning was the county commission meeting, the same one Patricia had pushed for, the one meant to finalize her energy development proposal. It was supposed to be her crowning moment. Instead, it would become her public execution. The county courthouse had seen its fair share of drama over the years, zoning fights, tax disputes, small-town politics. But nothing like what was about to unfold that Friday morning. Word had spread faster than a summer wildfire, and by 9 a.m., every seat was taken. People lined the walls, spilled out into the hallway, and crowded the courthouse steps outside. The air buzzed with that electric mix of curiosity and vengeance that only comes when the town smells. Scandal. This was supposed to be Patricia. Whitmore's victory parade. The big day she'd finally convinced the county to seize my farm for economic development. Instead, she was walking into her own downfall. I arrived in my grandfather's old truck, the same one he'd used to haul milk to the co-op half a century ago. In the passenger seat sat his cracked leather briefcase, stuffed with everything Marcus, Jimmy, and Tommy had uncovered. It felt symbolic, like I was bringing Earl Morrison back with me for one last fight. Inside the courthouse, Patricia was already there, standing at the front with her legal team. From a distance, she still looked like the polished professional she'd always pretended to be. Perfect suit, pearls, hair pulled tight. But up close, the cracks showed. Her eyes were puffy. Her smile twitched. The hands clutching her binder trembled like leaves in the wind. When the commissioners filed in, you could practically hear them regretting every signature they'd ever put on a document with Patricia's name. They hadn't signed up for this kind of mess. Federal investigations, media coverage, and half the town ready to riot. "Next item on the agenda," said Commissioner Hayes, his voice as tired as his eyes. "The proposal for the Tennessee Gateway Energy Center, submitted by the Willowbrook Estates Development Group." Patricia rose to her feet, her confidence flickering like a dying light bulb. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice sugary smooth, "this project represents a $12 million investment in our community. 200 jobs, millions in tax revenue, a cleaner, brighter future for East Tennessee." Behind her, the projector flickered to life, glossy renderings of a sleek glass and steel facility rising from the green fields of my farm. The audience murmured. On the surface, it looked beautiful, but all I could see was theft, the theft of 70 years of Morrison's sweat and soil dressed up as progress. When Patricia finished, the room stayed quiet. Then Commissioner Hayes looked toward me. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "you have the floor." I stood carrying Earl's briefcase like a soldier carrying a flag. My boots echoed against the marble floor as I walked to the podium. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Neighbors, reporters, county officials, even some of Patricia's allies who looked like they were regretting ever taking her side. "My name's Jake Morrison," I said. "My family's owned that farm since 1952. It's more than land to us. It's a legacy. And what you've just heard, that presentation, is a lie." You could feel the air tighten. Patricia's smile froze. I opened the briefcase and laid out the first folder, Marcus's financial investigation. This woman, the president of the Willowbrook HOA, also owns 15% of the very company proposing this so-called energy project. That's not community development, that's self-dealing. And she's been using her HOA power to bully property owners like me into selling below market value. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I reached for the next set of documents. She's been laundering money through HOA accounts to fund her personal gambling addiction, debts totaling more than $200,000. I handed copies to the commissioners, their faces hardening as they read. Then came the big one. I pulled out the signed drilling lease from Tennessee Energy Partners. And here's something Ms. Whitmore forgot to mention. I've already leased my mineral rights, legally and responsibly, to a certified Tennessee company. They'll extract natural gas with minimal environmental impact, bringing real jobs, real income, and real accountability. Over 10 years, this will generate $12 million in revenue, without seizing anyone's property. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, cameras flashing like lightning. Patricia jumped to her feet, face crimson. "This is harassment. This man is under a restraining order." Jimmy rose calmly from his seat, holding up a new court order. "That restraining order was dissolved this morning, Your Honor, when Ms. Whitmore was charged with obstruction of justice." The words hit her like a slap. The reporters scrambled to write it down. And then, from the back of the room, a calm, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Patricia Whitmore?" Everyone turned. Two men in dark suits stepped forward, badges gleaming. "Special Agent Martinez, FBI," one of them said, flipping open his credentials. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and violation of federal civil rights statutes." Patricia's mouth fell open. "You can't do this. I have rights. But the agents were already reading her Miranda warning as they turned her around and cuffed her hands. The crowd fell silent, watching the once untouchable queen of the HOA being led away in front of everyone. Neighbors, reporters, county officials, even the very people she'd once terrorized with violation notices. And then it happened. Mary Beth Chen stood up and started clapping. Slow, steady, proud. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. The sound of that applause filled every corner of the courthouse. A thunderclap of relief and justice. Commissioner Hayes banged his gavel for order, though even he was smiling. "The proposal for the Tennessee Gateway Energy Center is hereby withdrawn," he announced. "Mr. Morrison, congratulations on your lease agreement. And Ms. Whitmore," he glanced toward the doorway where she was being escorted out, "is no longer a problem for this county." It was over. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The fight that had started with a $500 noise violation had ended with federal charges and the truth out in the open. But the story didn't end there. Within 48 hours, Patricia's empire collapsed. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation froze her accounts. The HOA's finances were audited, revealing she'd embezzled nearly $200,000 from neighborhood funds. Her law license was suspended pending trial, and the Nashville firm representing her cut all ties. Even her prized BMW was repossessed, a sight that still makes me smile when I pass her empty driveway. Her trial moved fast. Facing mountains of evidence, Patricia pled guilty to fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in federal prison and ordered restitution of over $2 million. Money she didn't have, meaning she'd spend the rest of her life paying it off. But the real victory wasn't her orange jumpsuit. It was what happened to our town afterward. 6 months later, Tennessee Energy Partners began drilling, safely, cleanly, and quietly. The project created 50 local construction jobs and 20 permanent positions. The first royalty check, $1.2 million, hit my account right on schedule. I didn't buy a yacht or a mansion. I rebuilt the barn Earl had built with his hands. I bought 40 more head of cattle and restored the old farmhouse roof. Then I used the rest to start something my grandfather would have been proud of, the Earl Morrison Community Fund, a foundation to help local farmers pay legal fees, start new operations, and protect their land from predatory developers. The HOA? Gone. Dissolved by unanimous vote. Turns out, when you remove the tyrant, people realize they don't actually need 17 pages of rules about mailbox colors and approved plants. Mary Beth became the head of a new neighborhood committee, one that actually cared about the people living there, not the property values. And me? I stayed right where I belong. Still farming, still building. Still sitting on Earl's old porch swing at dusk, listening to the creek whisper through the pasture. The Netflix documentary came a year later, The Farm That Fought Back. Tommy's investigation won awards. And I still get messages from people around the world sharing their own HOA horror stories, asking how I did it. The answer's simple. I didn't do it alone. When good people stand together, even the most powerful bullies fall. Earl used to say, the land will take care of the family, if the family takes care of the land. He was right. And now, thanks to him, and a community that finally remembered what that word really means, the Morrison farm isn't just surviving. It's thriving, so if someone ever tries to take what's yours, remember this story. Because sometimes the little guy really does win.